Okay. Can everyone see my main screen, food for thought? I'm seeing that. Okay, great. Awesome. Let me just minimize here. All right. Welcome everyone to this month's member call. We're going to be focused around the theme of food for thought and sustainability surrounding events. I'll get into more of that and who is presenting in a second, but I'm just so excited to see everyone. Happy St. Patrick's Day to those of you who celebrate. I see some green. I'm definitely a proud member of the Irish community from my great grandparents. But let's get this party started. So a little bit of information. I know there's some new members on the call today. We are a small but mighty 100% virtual team with members based all around the world. For example, I'm in Guatemala City. Colin is currently in Spain. Ray is in Portugal. We have a lot of virtual nomads on the team. Missy's in Utah. TJ is in Colorado, I believe still. Yeah, he hasn't moved. Sergio is also there. So we have team members in different time zones. So if you ever have any questions around managing a remote virtual team and managing multiple time zones on an internal team, we are definitely the people you can tap for that as well. So just let me know. So some upcoming calls, I'm going to do a couple of updates before we dive into our call for today. We have a masterclass coming up next week at 8 a.m. Pacific time hosted by Keith from Spring. Masterclasses are more of an entrepreneur support organization or ESO community. So accelerators, incubators, investment funds, any organization that is dedicated to supporting social entrepreneurship. The masterclass series are for you. They happen about once a month. They're deep dive working group sessions. They usually last 60 to 90 minutes. And they're free for members and $20 per person per class for non-members of communers.org. We also have a members only coffee and tea connection call led by Derek from Vitality Living on April 4th at 10 a.m. Eastern time. And this is sort of a formal connection, informal connection space for members to get together and get to know one another on a more personal level. And then on April 14th, we have an Ask Me Anything, which is going to be sort of a peer-led panel of current members. This is a member call, ecosystem call. So it is open to everyone and free for everyone. So I really encourage all of our members on this call, since member calls are for members only, to join any of these calls as they are relevant and interesting for you. So our agenda for today, we're going over the welcome. There will be a community connection led by MeetGreen in a second, and then we'll hand over the mic to them and their team to lead us through the discussion for today. Just as a reminder, our member calls, we really like them to be highly engaging, participatory. At any time, if you have questions or want to participate, contribute from your own experience, please feel free to use the chat, raise your hand. And you can participate in the call. All of us have experience that's relevant that we can share on these calls, and so we really want them to be as engaging as possible. So just a couple of really quick updates for this year that I wanted to make sure everyone's aware of. We have several calls that happen throughout the year. We've actually created an entire content calendar based on the quarters of the year. And these are the 3 different types of calls that anyone in our community can feel free to raise their hand to lead any of these. So we have member calls, which are only for members. They happen on the 3rd Thursday of every month. We can definitely change the timing of them as needed by whoever wants to lead the call. They're for members and by members only, and they center around a topic of interest for our members. Masterclass series, as I already said, are those 90-minute working group sessions specifically for ESOs, free for members, $20 per person per class. And then our ecosystem calls are usually once a quarter. They're led by members or partners of ours, and they can be 90 minutes to 2 hours, and they're free and open to everyone. That's sort of our service that we provide to the ecosystem as a whole. Our thematic calendar, just so you all know, if you want to lead a call in the future, Q1, which is almost up, is sort of our New Year's resolutions. How do we get ramped up and excited for the year ahead? Diversity, equity, inclusion is coming up for Q2. So how do we really redefine how we're convening around DEI and everything that we do, both internally and externally? Q3 is summer wellness. So getting ready for the last bit of the year, the convening year and convening schedule, and really looking inward in terms of mindfulness for both founders and teams. and how to better practice wellness and integrate wellness practices into convenings. And then end of year reflections is Q4, and just looking back and celebrating and learning from the challenges that we've experienced this year. So if you have if any of those sort of jump out at you, we're taking, any sort of proposals from our members on a rolling basis. Just contact Colin at communers.org or myself, Sarah at communers.org. We also have mastermind groups that kicked off last year in June, which were the hybrid and virtual events, which is now also in person, climate sustainability and virtual engagement. So the hybrid and in-person events, as well as the climate sustainability, are still running. And then we've also launched an entrepreneur support organization leadership group. So if you all want to join any of those groups, or you want to start a new group, please let me know and reach out to me, and I can get you connected. All right, with that, I don't want to take any more time away from our amazing presenters today. We have the team from MeetGreen, and they have been an active member of communers.org for quite some time. They're a sustainable event management agency. We have the LinkedIn information there that Colin can put into the chat, and we're going to kick it off with brief introductions as well as our community connection for today. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing. And Colin, maybe we can pause the recording for this part since we're sharing.
We are going to play a little game right from the start. It's called, you may remember it from grade school, I Spy. So we have put out here 3 different menu planning options, and want to see if you can find the good or the bad, or what might be reasons why you would select or not select these menus. The first one is a vegan sushi. Second one is a carving station. And the third one is a caprese salad from local ingredients. And anybody can go off mute and share here.
I like the caprese salad. I think that might be just because of the local ingredients. I don't know about serving wise and like sanitation concerns when it comes to self-serve, but definitely have seen salads at a lot of convenings, and I think having something meatless and more light, it's not vegan, but it's at least, something different. So that I would go for that. Vegan sushi to me is like, what? Why? I mean, I know they make good vegan sushi, but at least for an event, that seems really, really niche and like expensive, and I don't know. That's the one that I would be like, no. The carving station though, I'm thinking about. I don't know.
Good. What you're seeing, the vegan is peppers from a garden, so they're local.
I like the vegan sushi. I think it's colorful, it's playful, and I think that it would be a good choice.
I saw that dish face to face. It was beautiful as well.
I think each one kind of has its own merits and drawbacks. I mean, the benefit of the locally sourced ingredients shows that there's a smaller footprint. When it comes to I'm a recovering carnivore, so I say people I'm like a vegan opportunist. I'll choose vegan if it's in front of me. But I would say from pure theatrics, having a carving station creates a different sense of what's happening at an event. But the vegan sushi pieces, that would, out of all of those 3, that would be my personal preference.
Interesting. All right. Any other comments? All right. I'm going to pass this on to Erin to define sustainable food, which is often the hardest part of the whole process.
Yeah, we've talked about this internally a lot, which is like serve sustainable food. And then you think to yourself, how? What is sustainable food? So it encompasses a lot of different attributes, and want to just give a couple of kind of event-specific definitions that were just mentioned, some of them, and some of them that weren't. The first is local. And the way that we define local, at least in events, is that the food was sourced within 250 miles of the event. And a second kind of piece to that is that it was supposed to be grown there in the first place. So it's not necessarily the most sustainable option to have a local tomato that is grown 100 miles away from Las Vegas in the desert, although it would be local technically. So that's something to keep in mind. Another one is certified organic. We all see this when we go to the grocery store, of course. This is a regulated certification, so you can't just put that it's certified organic without going through this process. And there's a lot of different boxes to check with this, but you can't use fertilizer when growing it. You have to make sure that the soil is replenished and the microorganisms can grow things in the future. The one kind of downside to this, I suppose, would be that local farmers have a tricky time affording this. So it's something that maybe they are actually sort of organic, but they can't get certified because they don't have the money to do so. Another one is seasonal. I think that's fairly self-explanatory. This is something that we always look for and ask chefs to do. You might as well source something that's supposed to be grown at that time. It's just a good thing to do kind of all around, at least from a sustainability perspective. And then there's the idea of what you're actually serving. And you all might be aware that depending on what you serve, it has much different environmental impacts. And we'll get into that a little bit later, but that's a really big piece of this. And it's something that we'll focus on quite a bit here in a little bit. So that's kind of like the overall, 4 different definitions-ish, and digging a little bit deeper into kind of individual events. I'm gonna pass it over to Jen for some kind of real world examples and how this fits in.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron. So as a planner, it's pretty common in the planning world that what you want to get from, and it's true in almost everything, what you want to get out of some venues or caterers, you will need to secure that in the very, very beginning before anything else so that it's in writing. So when I go and source a venue or a caterer, I try to incorporate sustainability in every aspect of what I'm doing with them. And so I put it in my request for proposals. I put it out there in the contracts and try to get the language that they're going to have at least one of the options so that they write it all out, that they're going to guarantee it in advance so that they're putting in there that it'll be hormone-free or fair trade or vegan options available, including, locally sourced when possible. And then for them to actually notify me in writing which of those items in the menu, and I start looking at them, are those local ingredients. I am often thinking about different examples of how I can show this. And one of my favorite ones that we've done is had a group that having something fair trade was super important to them. And having the coffee be fair trade in the rooms itself. So when you're meeting, you're taking up this huge housing block of rooms, and we might have thought of everything in the menus for the attendees, but then we took it a step further and went into the hotel rooms where you wake up in the morning and there's the coffee packet right there. And so we wound up negotiating with the hotel to remove all those coffee packets because they weren't fair trade, and replacing them at registration and giving attendees an option to come and get your fair trade coffee packet for your room. So that also meant that we were investigating the coffee, because those individual ones in the room are a lot different than your regular coffee pot at home. And they're not all the same. So it was a bit of a challenge, but being able to provide that, and then having it at registration where if you're not a coffee drinker, you're not going to come and take it. So it's creating less waste there as well. And then we also sourced fair trade tea too for that. And so I know Aaron didn't touch too much about fair trade in the respect to why is that sustainable. But if you think about, if you're giving fair wages to people, especially farmers in these communities, then you are helping them sustain a better lifestyle. And people who typically are in these spaces where they're not receiving fair wages are the people who can usually do less about justice for them and are the most impacted by the environmental climate change. So Aaron, I think I could maybe mention another moment where we had incorporated a vegetarian meal for an event, and it was about a $9 savings per person in that meal. And we wound up just kind of telling everybody about that because, we talked a little bit about earlier, maybe that sushi's more expensive, but oftentimes your vegetarian meals are less expensive. And when we were able to convey to the audience that we're doing this for a carbon savings and a water savings, we were able to do it through the messaging in advance. We were able to do it on site about it so that people also knew what they were getting when they were coming to the event. And Erin, if you want to talk about some methods and measures on why this matters further.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great transition. And I was thinking, just seeing Sarah's question in there, what's the most impactful thing that you can look at from a certification standpoint? There is kind of that whole piece where it's the fair trade, certified organic, local, all that stuff. And then there's kind of the elephant in the room over here, which is what you're actually choosing to serve and the life cycle impacts of these products that we just see on our plate, but they had to be grown and packaged and put through this entire processing deal and before it actually gets to your plate. And that's really resource intensive in a lot of cases. I want to dig a little further into that, but also I would like to start our first poll of the day and ask, I believe, Colin, are you doing this poll? Nice. So I want to see if you all can choose the most sustainable menu option. We're just going to do a couple polls. This first one is kind of main items. So this is going to be sustainability from a resource perspective. So it doesn't say certified organic on here or anything like that. It's mostly just from a wastewater energy emissions standpoint. Well, it looks like I don't actually have to do any more talking because you all got it right. But I want to dig a little bit further into, I can share the results. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, 100%. Let's dig a little bit deeper into why that is the case. And I'm going to share one stat and then we'll go into kind of a visual that will represent this pretty well. So the average vegetarian meal produces 6 times fewer emissions than the average beef meal. So 6 times fewer, 600% for the vegetarian meal. And if a family of 4 ate a vegetarian meal instead of a beef meal for an entire week, that's like taking a car off the road driving from New York City to Miami. So about 1,400 miles of emissions, basically. So if that's essentially if that family switched their diet, then they could go to Disney World. Not really how sustainability works, but just kind of keeping that in mind. And you want to actually share? Yeah, that's great. So this is a graph, hopefully you can see it, that takes into account this whole supply chain idea that I was talking about before. Along the top, you can see the different attributes in color code, and you can see land use change, farming, processing, transport. There's just a lot of things that go into making your food. And then along that vertical axis, you can see the different food types from beef, several different other types of coffee and chocolate. I know I don't want to say that out loud. Keep continuing going down to various different plant-based options. And this is where you can make really the biggest impact in your event, is just what foods you serve. There's really good data out there about location specific carbon footprints, energy footprints, water footprints, and why this is actually the case. It makes sense that if you're growing food for your food to eat, then it's going to be more resource intensive to make. And of course, beef is kind of, as much as you can take beef off the menu, going back to that kind of carving station deal, the better. I want to do one more poll here if possible. And we can stop sharing the screen if you'd like. And this is with drinks, and this is not trying to wave a finger at anybody who likes any of these particular drinks. It's just kind of things to keep in mind as you're going through this, and it's fairly interesting. So what's the most sustainable option here? And as you're doing that, I'll mention that MeetGreen's coming out with an event food and carbon calculator coming up, and it's a way for you to create menus and compare those in terms of what their carbon footprint is. It could be really handy, and it could be a really nice thing for you to share as you're planning your events or sharing your choices. All right, so it looks like tea is actually the winner by kind of a considerable margin. Tea is very low in the emissions standpoint. Coffee is actually the most, and we saw that on the graph. And then wine is right there in the middle. So, I mean, if you're choosing between coffee and wine, first of all, I want to hang out with you, but also that's the wine would be the best choice. So there you go. So that's a way to kind of create a menu that just on its own will reduce its footprint. I'm going to pass it back over to Jen to talk about kind of the attendee food experience and how they think about, reducing meat or reducing beef or those sorts of things.
Aaron, I just had a quick question in terms
Yeah.
of how these are calculated, because
Mhm.
coffee, well, I'm in Guatemala, so coffee is grown here. So it might be a little bit different from wine. That's definitely, I mean, we have wine in Chile and Argentina, but why I would think, I'm just trying to think about it in terms of like irrigation or chemicals used, or is it, or more transport, like what are the percentages of calculating that?
For sure, yeah. And I am going to go back to this chart to see where the coffee is actually the most. And it looks like it's in the farming practice and the land use change. So my guess is for coffee, the land was already kind of a carbon sink potentially. It already had forest there. It already had, a way for carbon to be sequestered from the air that had to be cut down to make the coffee plantation. So that's a big part of it as well.
Is there a difference, sorry, because I'm a coffee nerd, but is there a difference in terms of calculating the cost from shade grown to sun coffee? Because in shade grown, they do actually have multiple types of trees to kind of try and replicate what used to be there. And it's really good for forests or for bird habitats, etc.
Yeah, I love you bringing this up because this chart is very macro level. And if you get into the micro level, there's of course a lot of different changes. Shade grown is definitely better. It also retains moisture a lot better, so you don't have to water it as much. And there's just a lot of benefits to doing a lot of different individual farming practices. The way to use this chart, at least in my opinion, is just as kind of a general rule. And you can see that one sticks out above all the other ones, which is beef. And then as you move down, it's more kind of plant-based, becomes a lesser footprint. So that's kind of the way that I think about it, at least. So yeah, there are certain examples where these bars would be bigger and smaller.
And I would imagine that, like, depending on where things are grown that are native to those certain areas or better for those climates, that shifts the charts a little bit, right? Because like wine,
Exactly.
if you're growing it in an already very arid climate, it's perfect for wine because those grapes love to be nice and dry and hot. So
exactly. Yes, absolutely.
okay, thanks.
Yeah, for sure.
So kind of touching on the meat being so carbon and water intensive. There's a lot of you are probably thinking there's just no way. There's no way I'm going to have an event and not be able to put meat out there. So I would encourage you then to think about all the meal periods you are having at your event or conference and maybe just make one of them that way. Because you just could see the big impacts that it can make. And if you still think like, just no, not my audience is just not going to go for that. Maybe you can include it at your coffee breaks, your snack breaks. So you're not, doing a beef carpaccio in your appetizers, but maybe you're doing a stuffed mushroom instead. And then also kind of think about it, you're being more inclusive, right? Joshua mentioned that he has left that area, but we all will eat the mushroom, but we all might not eat that little beef toast that's being passed around, right? And then also younger people and people of color are actually more likely to be plant-based than white Americans. So you're bringing in a little bit more of the community by offering just more plant-based options. And then another way, to kind of jump that hurdle, because a lot of times attendees, if they realize there is no meat there, they're going to flip out or just maybe be curious as to what the heck is going on. And as I kind of mentioned earlier, it's really the whole part of it is letting people know in advance so that they know what to expect. But even beyond that, you can express the message as to why you're doing it. And it helps to spread the word as to so people know, because I find that a lot of people don't know that your food has an impact on the environment. So when you can tell them in an app at the conference, maybe on a screen, or even little food tent cards, the savings emissions, it's a great way to be able to let them feel good about the choices and let them know that, hey, by having this lunch today, you saved 1,400 miles from a car being on the road.
That's great. Jen and Aaron, thank you so very much. It looks like Joshua's got his hand up. Joshua, did you want to hop off mute and share your question or observation?
What Jennifer was saying, I'm just curious, I'm in Vermont, and I am serendipitously only like 20 miles away from the Ben & Jerry's factory. So sometimes when I come back from work, I like to drive by Ben & Jerry's just for an ice cream, even in February, because that's what we do in Vermont. And have this, as you're walking to, you kind of get involved and, inundated into, they have all these, social service actions and all these things about, and telling you where everything's sourced and all this. So I'm wondering too, as you brought that up, is from an edutainment perspective, when it comes to having meals, is like having pre-written, as you said, some placards to talking about, as you say, as you mentioned, of like, is there a way that kind of like from like a Department of Labor makes us hang up OSHA posters? Is there like a central place where there's like pre-printed placards or PDF files that we can print out and just stick up next to the table where we're serving food that doesn't have any meat with it?
You could absolutely do that. The venues, so many of them have those little placard signs or a little easel that they will throw up on there. And there's no reason you can't ask them to give you one of those, or, as a planner, I bring them on site and I can incorporate that, just slide that in to the buffet. But I love that idea, and give people the chart shows them, hey, before you're making decisions as to what you're putting on your plate, take a look at this. It's interesting. It's also something kind of fun to talk about as you're walking around at, buffets and such. It's a great question. I love that idea.
Yeah, we've also seen menus sorted based on sustainability certification. So it could be carbon, health considerations, and so forth, which is really interesting. Aaron, did you have anything to add to this question? Otherwise, we'll.
Yeah, just that there are a lot of resources to do those calculations for you, since it is fairly customized. So it depends on what you're actually serving at the event. I would say a really good resource is going to be this carbon calculator that MeetGreen's coming out with fairly soon, to give you kind of a general understanding, at least of the carbon footprint side of things. But the chart that I just showed, there's a lot of resources out there. Happy to share tons of them.
Yeah, cool. Okay. Well, I think we've gotten to a lot of the questions. So unless there's anything pressing, we'll go on to food waste. Anyone? Okay. All right, Aaron, the floor is yours.
All right. I think we're going to share another I Spy. So this is around food waste, donation, and diversion.
That's right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So if for our I Spy game, once again, there's three different options to discuss. The first one is in the foreground, you see individual bottled juices, but in the background, you see where they're actually building smoothies with whole fruit. The second one are the little mini condiment bottles that are often served so that you can take one back to your table. And the third is bacon that's actually being put into containers to be donated.
And for those of you who joined after we did our first I Spy, you can just come off of mute and point out any sort of sustainable or not sustainable things in the pictures.
Okay, so I'll get started. The first sustainable piece is the whole fruits and produce in the background for the juices and the smoothies. And the donation for the bacon is another sustainable practice.
Mm-hmm.
I would say the fruit station, because if it does go bad, you can compost fruit. You can't compost, depending on where you live, you can't compost bacon if it's not eaten. So it would be thrown away. That would be my guess.
I would go with the, I'll have the trend and say the middle, especially if those are the small personal size.
Right.
Those are easy to take with you as well. And for someone that has a bunch of like hotel shower gels that I'm never gonna the piece of it, my concern with the fruit is, yes, it's compostable, but it's also, there's nowhere they're gonna use all that. There's a lot of it that ends up not being all. And bacon, you know, it's as much as people love bacon, that's going to end up getting thrown away. But at least the small jars are going to be, first of all, they're sealed. You can use them again and again and again, and it's preserves itself. Will stay fresh and used as a. So that's my piece.
Interesting.
I worked in hotels for quite a while, and I don't know about all hotels, and I'm not going to name the hotel brand, but those little jars were not reused, and people would take them to their room, use their tiny bit, and then they would all go in. It always pained me to see them on the room service trays because they all went to the garbage generally.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I worry about, Colin, whenever I get one of those jars, because I want to use it a little bit, and I know for me, I'm like, okay, I might sneak it into my purse and reuse it for my next meal, but I know not everybody thinks like me. And I have to say, I was torn on the bacon and the juice and smoothie one, because I try to consume as much every bite of my food, and I do like to see food donated if it's not used. But then I'm looking at the juice bottles and I don't see the pulp. So then that's just like the fibrous material from the plant that's going to waste if it's not composted. And obviously all the energy and everything that comes with bottling it up so perfectly.
You are a great ice buyer. Well, you're all great.
Yeah, this is
Wow. That's fabulous. Well, I'm going to turn it over to Aaron to start the conversation about food waste and donation.
yeah, and we'll touch on some of these things as we're going through here, but wanted to level set again, as we did in the previous section, just kind of what we mean when we say food waste, or what we mean when we say, you know, donation, or what falls into these categories. And event specific food waste is a little bit different. So like event food waste than what you would think of at home potentially. So event food waste, or how we define it, is any food that's not consumed on site. So that can be things that you package up and donate. That is considered food waste from our perspective. You can donate it to people, to animals. It can go to compost facilities. They can go to the landfill, of course, which is the last option for us at least. And wanted to dig a little bit deeper into that compost idea. There's actually a biomethane facility in Portland. There are some around the country, more internationally, and the compost goes there. They use the off gases from the organic material that you send there to create energy. So just another form of using that food waste. But of course, we want to reduce food waste as much as possible. And that's one thing that Jen does a lot of when she's planning events, is thinking ahead to not over ordering and how to handle all this food waste stuff. So I'm going to toss it over to her, and she'll give some better real world examples than I could.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. So I love talking about menu planning and doing the menu planning for events. It's really exciting for me. And a little bit earlier, I talked about, you know, getting the chefs on board and your catering professionals included in early on. And so I'd done this event pretty recently where we got to be really creative with the menu and take the pesto sauce that was made with beets and use the beet leaves to make a pesto sauce from a salad that included the beets. And then the strawberry leaves from the fruits in the morning that were on the Continental, took the tops of them and freeze dried them, and then they were blended into smoothies later. Another really cool thing that the chef got excited to do was for the egg portion in the breakfast, he saved all the shells and ground them up really fine and included them in a veggie burger. So that kind of, I guess, in some ways doesn't make it vegan, but it reduced food waste and it was a veggie burger. So, you know, another just super creative thing. And what I find is that in a lot of places, your chefs are going to want to do something cool. Some of them don't. Some of them, kind of push back a little bit, want to do the run of the mill. But I find that a lot of them, when you get to talking to them, they want to highlight, and they want to highlight their area. A lot of them are proud of where they're cooking and they're bringing their food in from. So it's also a really fun break from the norm for them. And you encourage them to kind of be, their own creative selves, which I think a lot of chefs get in the business for to begin with. And then on the planning side, just kind of a fun way to help reduce food waste is you could gamify it. You can bring that in. You can do like a clean plate club. You get points for every clean plate that you finish. You could encourage people to not put as much on their plates by actually having smaller plates on the buffet. You could talk to that with your venue or caterer, so that you're not getting the platter size plate, but you're getting just kind of the salad size plate. Because we eat a lot at events. We just do. And then you could also do something simple like having a sponsor sign on to do this, they can deliver the food, and you can tell everybody, today's menu leftovers are being brought to our local food bank, sponsored by company name. So I think that's a really fun way to bring that in, and also allows the community to look good and highlights the good that's going on.
Yeah, and that reminds me of the first client that I ever worked with MeetGreen, and the first real big event I ever went to was for a fast food company that I'm not going to name, but they had 10 different menu items for every single meal, and they thought it would be the best idea to order one of each of them for each person, just in case each person chose that they wanted, that chose like menu item one, they wanted to make sure they had enough. So there was 10 times more food than they actually needed. And it was me until the wee hours unpackaging things and tossing it into compost for hours and hours and hours. So just the mentality of over ordering and thinking that you need to have so much food for the folks that are coming is very common. And it's also something to just keep in mind as you're planning for folks. The food waste is pretty remarkable as you go into it. And of course, that impacts the environment as well. We talked about all the resources it takes to make the food in the first place. Think about that food just going directly from there to the compost, right? It's like you're just wasting all of that essentially. So I want to think a little bit more deeply actually about the environmental impacts and what it looks like to donate food, what the food waste looks like. I want to share a couple stats first, which popped up on the screen here that are kind of like those macro stats. So if food waste was its own country, it would be the third largest greenhouse gas emitter behind China and the United States. So just the food that's wasted would be the third largest. That's what that graph shows there. In the United States, about 133 billion pounds of edible food goes to waste, worth about $161 billion. This is like looking up into the stars. Like you almost can't fathom how big these numbers are, right? And this third one I think is really fascinating, which is food waste accounts for 21% of US landfill waste. So as we're trying to reduce our landfill waste, as we're trying to compost the food that is wasted, still 1/5 of our landfills are full of food waste that we didn't actually eat. And Barry, if you want to go to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more about just how that donation stream looks and all this. So on the right side, you'll see the food recovery hierarchy from the EPA. And this is what we use as a preference. So, starting at the top, going down. And number one with a bullet, as I just have to continue to reiterate, is reducing the amount of food waste in the first place. It's really better to just not have food waste. It's not always possible, of course. So next down is feeding hungry people. Next down is feeding hungry animals, which I forgot to mention in the fast food example. We were calling zoos to try to get rid of this food. We were calling like everybody in the city to try to get rid of it. So feeding animals is part of that kind of process. Industrial use is what I talked about with biomethane, creating energy off of it, compost, and then landfill. You can see a stat over to the left that explains why composting is so much better than throwing it in the landfill. Of course, it can't be recovered either. And then this last point I wanted to mention, because a lot of the pushback that we get is, can we donate the food? And they say no, for liability reasons, we can't. And there's a Good Samaritan law. It was passed in 1996. There's a whole bunch of different ones that are a little more stringent in particular states, but essentially it says you are not liable for donating food that then potentially makes someone sick or whatever the case may be. So it's very broad coverage. So it's kind of like an urban myth. We hear it all the time. And it's just something that you can have in your back pocket. If someone says that, you don't have to say you're wrong. You can say, oh, there's actually this law. It'd be great if you knew about this, because that actually protects you from anything that might happen from that food that you donate to folks. And it's of course great to donate food to folks.
Erin, I have a question about
please.
composted organic. This does not mean composted organic food, just because here in the Seattle area, we can pretty much throw anything into our compost.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So you said in Seattle you can throw everything in your compost?
Yeah, I remember somebody said, oh, I don't know if baking can go in the compost. Like, I'm pretty sure I've thrown meat into my compost.
Yeah, for sure. There's a difference between kind of backyard compost and industrial compost.
Okay.
And yeah, industrial compost can often take pretty much anything. You'll want to check locally. Sometimes it changes locally, but you can throw in bones and bacon and grease and all sorts of stuff, because it goes in these huge yards, gets to a certain temperature that you really can't get easily in your backyard. And it actually does break those things down. So yes, definitely. Yep. And that's yard clippings and all those other things too. Although we're not cows, so I don't know if that would be considered food. Nice. I don't see anybody else coming off mute, so I'm actually going to pass it over to Jen to again kind of get into that focused individual event sort of thought process.
Yeah, I think Erin, you showed on that triangle, or the upside down triangle there, kind of the most the top level thing is to reduce it right from the start. And as a planner, the biggest thing that you have to do to really reduce that food order is not, first it's to keep track, right? You got to start looking at your event. If you're somebody who does this event again and again, you're most likely tracking your numbers. You're looking at your data and seeing that, day 4 of this conference, at the last meal, you have dropped probably 50% of the attendees who showed up on that first keynote attendance there. So if you are ordering for everybody, all your registered attendees on that last meal, you've got this mountain of waste sitting there. And that's, definitely quite a bit different. And it's another great place that you can save a ton of money too. You also think about, I don't know, I just went to this new cool city where my conference is at, and I'm not going to stick around for the hotel chicken. I know that there's this great new restaurant that I'm seeing all over Instagram that I've got to go check out. As a planner, I'm not going to order all that food for people who are really excited to go out and see the city. So I think that, by monitoring your numbers, you can really make a big difference on reducing your food waste on events and save money, which clients always like.
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again, Jen and Erin. I think it's so important that we talk about food waste and get the conveners group thinking about avoiding food waste from the very beginning of the planning process. So we wanted to do just touch upon serviceware, which is also important in terms of sustainable food. And then we can take a couple more questions. Should we start with you, Erin, for
yeah, I can dive in real quick just for a couple minutes. It's not necessarily sustainable food per se, although compostable serviceware is made of organics, so technically, but the bottom line really is that compostable serviceware, biodegradable serviceware, recyclable serviceware is very rarely doesn't end up in the landfill. It's really difficult to find a place where these go. You can see in this this graph here that after about 50 uses of a reusable plate, for instance, the environmental benefits are better for that plate than it is for all this disposable stuff. And you can think about how much waste is created there as well. This graph over to the right is from our white paper, which I'll send in the chat if you are interested in it. And it really digs very, very deeply, but it's also something that you can kind of just see at a glance too, that will give a little bit more information about why reusables are so much better than disposables from an environmental standpoint. And I know Jen agrees with me that it's much more it's just better from a attendee experience standpoint as well. The plastic fork isn't breaking in your as you're trying to cut something and the whole thing. There it is. There's that plastic fork that's cut and a sad face. So that's kind of the bottom line. Yeah, more information is definitely at that white paper. And of course, we're here for any questions. This is something that we do essentially every day, is talk about this sort of stuff. So we're pretty passionate about it, and can kind of back up anything, especially if folks are coming back to you with things like, doesn't use more water, some of those common ones.
Yeah, I think if you think about it and you just looked at those images, there's a totally different experience too for somebody, right? You saw the silver chafing dishes, the beautiful white linens, and you're sitting down and you're at your event and somebody comes over and you're just excited about, being there. And then if you compare that to the plastic fork and the hard waffle, cutting it on a plastic plate, and you're cranky about it and you can't get it to quite do what you want and it breaks, and then somebody sits down next to you and you feel flustered, you don't know them. It can preserve a healthy mental state too by having reusable silverware. It's just something small that can affect your whole day.
Yeah, so very, very true. And not to mention if you get, something on your shirt because of poor serviceware choices. So we've got a couple of minutes for questions. Does anyone have any questions that you either want to pop off mute or put it in the chat? Otherwise, I can go back to a question or two that have already come up.
Yeah, Annette?
I have a question for Jen. When I think about the reuse and I think about the ordering, it makes me think of the airlines and some of the things that have morphed during these times. One question, some of the airlines are starting to allow advanced ordering for something so that they're stocking the plane. And I'm just wondering when that might come about, or if that's coming about at all when somebody's registering for an event.
That's a great question. Aaron was with me on an event back in 2019 where we actually had people pre-order their lunches for an event, and it helped us know who was going to stay around. We didn't order more food, and we ordered specifically for those individuals. Inevitably, a couple of people didn't pick up their meals, and Aaron was the trooper and actually ate them for the rest of the time at the conference. But there was only like 2 people who had left them behind, and it helps if you can, actually ask people or have them buy into letting you know. And with the airlines too, you have people who actually are spending their own money sometimes on those meals in advance, where sometimes in advance on a conference, the conference is picking up the tab. So there is that, well, I purchased it, so I'm actually going to show up and go get my food factor too, where on a conference, I don't care that somebody else paid for it. It's gone, it's out of mind by the time I'm at the event, that whole ticket price included a meal. But yeah, that's a great question. Taking inventory ahead of time is important.
It is a great question, Annette. All right, we've got a couple more minutes. Any other questions? You guys have been great about sharing them as we go. So hearing nothing, Nancy, any closing thoughts?
I just want to thank you all for this great discussion. We could do this all day long. So thank you for joining us and for the thought-provoking considerations of sustainable food.
I want to make sure we thank the whole MeetGreen team for their time and investment today. And I think this has been a really wonderful conversation. I know I have learned a lot, so it's a lot of really valuable resources. And I'm definitely really excited to see the scorecard and everything being shared with all of the members. So I'm really excited for that to come out. Please let us know when it does, so we can share it across the whole membership community.
Yeah, we'll make sure we do, Sarah. Thank you.
Great. Well, with that, let's wrap up for today. Thank you